I mean, even in the Splicer, like one of the best things is just how everything is getting very almost like political, and it's almost reflecting real life in a lot of ways. I saw a lot of hints about like things that happened in America recently. Like a lot of you can tell the writers were definitely kind of definitely making some underlying mentions to real life American politics. And there's what I guess xenophobia and hate against aliens and immigration, and like there's a lot of like real life issues that they're cleverly weaving in. And you've got Lakshmi, the big alien hater, and it's just it was interesting as well. They're actually doing something with the faction leaders. That was good to see. And
right. And they brought back a fantastic voice actress to do that, who's had a lot of kind of characters play this kind of role out before, especially in things like The Expanse. So yeah, really fantastic to see that too. I'll say this as well, like the fact that they're weaving that stuff in, I think is really good for the sake of the fact that on an objective level, you're able to tell stories that not only are more relevant to people, but also feel a lot more real and feel a lot more deep. You know, I think some of the more powerful parts of shows such as, say, Battlestar Galactica end up coming about because of the conflict between the quote-unquote human faction and the quote-unquote alien faction, you know? Not going to go too deep into that story because that's a whole other tangent, but this exact scenario of a bunch of aliens that previously had been enemies, it comes up in BSG in the whole thing of like the Colonials versus the Cylons, and it's like the way that they can play that stuff out. There are definitely firebrand characters like Lakshmi who could work in a very offensive, aggressive position, and almost everything that Lakshmi does towards Mithrax and the Fallen is a veiled threat, and she makes no fucking plan of hiding any of that.
Yeah,
you know, and the most important thing of all of it, though, I think, is that when it comes down to it, she feels justified in doing that, and it shows a complex side to the conflict, which means that there isn't just a pure black and white aspect to it, you know? She is looking at examples of history where it has been the case that there's been good reason to distrust the Fallen, and now it's about sitting down and having a nuanced conversation of saying, these Elixni are not the same as the Fallen that attacked us at Twilight Gap. There are different motives. That's not to say that every single Fallen is perfect, but you can't say that every human is perfect either. You know, you have to sit there and actually understand that the world is not a thing of black and white lines. It's very much shades of grey. And understanding that Mithrax and the House of Light are actually trying to ally with us in good faith is probably one of the most important steps towards understanding that shades of grey side of things. You know? Yeah, that's really good. I'd say this too, like just to return very briefly to touch on the aspect of Destiny's enemies. I think the cool thing for that is that, I mean, even between what we can see with the last few seasons with Mithrax and Keitel, is that Destiny used to just have enemies. You know, Hive, Fallen, Taken, Cabal, Vex. Now the enemies have ascended into either villains, antagonists, or in some strange cases, allies. You know, Mithrax, previously Fallen, and some of the Fallen generally, you know, you have someone who's now become an ally. Whether that is an ally of convenience or whether that's an ally in good faith is going to be one of those things that reveals itself through the story, although it seems very clear that it's going to be an ally in good faith. You have people that, you know, previously would have just been an enemy. If Keitel had been a villain in Destiny 1, you can bet that it would have just been Cabal Empress, Keitel, go shoot. You know, now you sit there and you understand the dynamics of the Cabal as a people, and you understand her position as someone who doesn't necessarily want to fight a long drawn out war with the Guardians, but has also learned to respect them thanks to our actions and proving grounds. And then you have the people that are genuinely hellbent on undermining us for a bunch of different reasons, and they are the villains, you know. Savathun, the darkness, to an extent, building in the story, you've got Shiva Arath. You got all these great characters, and before it would have just been, hey, there's bad guy, go shoot. Now you actually have those layers of depth and complexity. Thank God. Yeah, it's and also like even with Lakshmi, I always wonder I wonder how many new-ish players probably never even seen her before in the game, because she hasn't been really. I mean, well, she's in the tower. You can't interact. You couldn't. Is she still in the tower? Can you interact? You can't interface. You can't interact with her.
There
but
in the
she's still in the tower.
Like, I wonder how many players have just never even known, because obviously the factions were, as many people who played Destiny 2 knows, were they were introduced with what faction rallies, which was a fun time. The farming the weep. Anyone that remembers that?
Oh boy.
But then Bungie kind of realized that the factions were, I guess they just couldn't really live up to their expectations. So they pretty much removed them from the game for a good up until now. So we actually got the faction leader doing something, which is interesting to see. And obviously her opinions on things are very, very, very conservative. But she, I mean, her viewpoint is a weird one because I guess like what she saw a vision of Mithrax in a fallen in a dilapidated version of the city, and now she's just assuming that they're the bad guys, and it's almost like this self-fulfilling prophecy where she's assuming they're the bad guys, so she's probably gonna like try and push them into being the bad guys. But yeah, she's not very compassionate. It seems like, but it's good. It's not just like it's showing. Again, it's showing a lot more human elements, and there's nuance to it. There's people that have different opinions. There's conflict, and there's a lot of perspective going on, which is cool to see. Again, we're getting a lot more like city story, and it's not just like Guardians go out and kill aliens and other planets. It's like there's actually conflict, and what do you think about this? And the little transmissions, and they're really just filling out the story well.
Yeah. So I think that part of the reason why Lakshmi's story this time around is so good is partly because there's a lot to decipher about the depth of what she is really fighting for and what she believes. And the cool thing is, in terms of, I say cool thing, it's kind of a really hard way to describe it. But the good thing in terms of creating depth for the story is that Lakshmi, I think, has some good faith reasons to be very wary of the Fallen. And then she has a few reasons that are tellingly bad faith. So the good faith reasons that she states, at very least to you directly in the story, are simply, I had visions of the Red Legion attacking and I was quietly ignored, and then when the Red Legion did attack, we were prepared. We were able to help the citizens of the city. I'm now having visions of this, thanks to the machine that the FWC hoards away that lets them see into the future. I am not going to stay silent on this. I'm going to shout about it loudly. And it's true, she does have a series of visions where Mithrax is at the center of a Vex portal that opens up in the city, and the city is in flames and is in ruins, and consistently, it's getting ruined. But in one of those visions, the vision that turns out with the city triumphing and the future war cult actually being able to repel some of this, if I'm not mistaken, it's in the stochastic variable lore tab, it shows her position as she is now at the very beginning, and then it shows her position after that final timeline. And in that, it shows that she personally has ascended to a sort of leader/dictator role. And it's one of these moments of sitting there and saying, are you pursuing this because you genuinely care about the safety of the city? Or are you pursuing this for personal means and personal power? And it's one of these really fascinating things. Like, I really can't wait to make a video on this because this is going to be such a great discussion. But it's one of these really fascinating moments of sitting there and saying, we can have an argument in good faith, but there's enough depth in the characters for them to have genuine personal bad faith reasons to hate the Fallen or to want them to, fall out of faith with the citizens of the lost city. And it's going to be a real test of the depth of the writing to see how this comes out in the story in the next coming weeks. Because, holy Lord, can you imagine if she makes a grab for power? Can you imagine if Lakshmi actually tries to become a dictator and overthrow the Vanguard? Could you see that happening? Could you even fathom? That would be incredible. It's one of those moments where Destiny storytelling could actually ascend into something that's way bigger and honestly way better than it's been for years, because it involves something that is intrinsically really tricky to decide about. Like, if you sat there and you had to ally yourself either with the House of Light or the FWC, I think it's pretty clear that most people would side with the House of Light, but you bet there's going to be a solid fifth or something of people that sit there and they're like, nope, Lakshmi's right. Like, that's brilliant. That's such a great aspect of this story.
That's actual, faction. That's it's even better than the premise of factions were initially, with faction wars and faction rallies, and everyone always wanted the faction to be involved. So that would be, Dead Orbit and the Monarchy aren't really, I'm not sure where they are, but it would be interesting, if you were able to take sides. And you know what, I believe this, almost like political parties. I believe, she's absolutely right. Let's take her side. And yeah, it's just really interesting how it's all playing out, and obviously her voice actor return, which is good.